Sylvia and me.
Sylvia and
Sylvia and me. Sylvia and
Sylvia.
Sylvia
and me.
Sylvia.
When we don't have resilience, we can feel as though the world buffets us, knocks us about, that we don't have any traction in any of our decisions. But when we learn to recognize resilience and to create resilience, we understand that we are powerful in our own right and that we can make a difference for ourselves.
Hi, I'm Sylvia Beckerman, host of the podcast series Sylvia and Me. Conversations with inspiring, empowering women.
Hi, my name is Sally Baker. I'm a senior therapist. I'm based in London, England. I've been in practice for about 25 years. And welcome to Sylvia and Me.
Sally, I am so pleased that you could be with me here today. You're in London. I'm in Connecticut. We're a little bit, far apart, but the subject that we're going to talk about is global. It's universal.
Absolutely.
And you are the author of The Getting of Resilience from the Inside Out.
Yeah.
And there is one passage that I'd like to read because I think it kind of goes into what our conversation is going to be.
Okay, let's hear it.
Okay, so to give a little background, just a little, you were sexually assaulted when you were 7.
Correct, yes.
Okay. It had taken almost 30 years to process the story I had told myself. It was never my fault and never my shame. As young and ill-equipped as I was to describe what had happened, I had been heard. My mother's mistake had been to omit ever calling me to her side to reassure me that she'd stood up for me, had spoken out for me, and that I was okay. The story I had told myself caused me harm for a long time, and I spent many years dealing with the fallout of the negative judgments I made about myself from what had happened to me and how I believed my mother blamed me. I've come a long way with resolving and letting go of my limiting beliefs and recognizing my self-doubt. However, I've discovered there's nothing quite like writing a book on resilience to make me question my assumptions and highlight my vulnerabilities all over again.
It's
and
true.
That really, to me, is the essence of what we're going to talk about and resilience. Can you tell me really what is resilience?
Sure. And there are so many definitions. They talk about resilience in the oil industry, or they talk about how children coming out of the care system need to be resilient. But, resilience, the clue's in the title, it comes from us. And ideally, we generate it, we create it, we build it in a childhood where we are loved, honored, and adored, and heard, and feel safe, and not judged. So I never see those people who had those kind of childhoods. They're not my client base. They're out there having a great time. So I see the people who grew up in challenging circumstances, who never developed resilience from their family structure. But the good news is you can develop resilience as an adult. And that means learn to be flexible, learn to trust yourself, learn to know that you've got traction in the world and that you can make a difference for yourself and for others.
And what we're talking about is, as you said, what happened to you when you were 7, you were blaming yourself. You had all these negative thoughts, and there was no one for you to talk to, because as happens a lot, an adult told you, really, we don't talk about it. Forget about it. It happened. It's over. It's done. Yes. And what we've seen so much now is, as people are getting older, they're either just remembering something that happened, or maybe hearing stories from other people and realizing, oh my, I'm not to blame. And that's difficult. But I like how you say that it can be taught, it can be learned.
Yes, because we're not stuck. Nothing's carved in stone. We are neuroplastics. We have neuroplasticity. We can change and develop. And that's so important for everyone to know, so that, we're not stuck in old patterns of behavior. but it's a process. Just like we can't do our own root canal work, we can do a lot of self-discovery, and that's brilliant, and we can know maybe where our sensitivities are, where our trigger points are, but at some point it's probably useful to do work with someone else, someone who can look at what you say but also listen to those silences, because so much is not said.
And that's the thing. So much really isn't said. And I love how you say it's like when a detective is going out there, it's not what you see, it's what you don't see. When a doctor looks at you, it's not what they see, it's what they don't see,
Absolutely.
what they don't hear.
Yes, yes. So, and you're right. I mean, I'm not sure whether, people are rediscovering or remembering stuff that happened to them as kids. I think they've always known it, but it's very deeply buried. And people bury it under all sorts of behavior, self-sabotaging behaviors like hoarding or overeating or, drug abuse, alcohol, excess drinking, all of that stuff is ways of burying down long-held pain. And the eldest person that disclosed to me for the first time, she'd never told anyone, was 68, and she'd carried it all her life. And when she was 6 or 7 years old, carried it all her life. And when we had Jimmy Savile in the UK, when that whole paedophile case came up, people were reconnected to their pain. They were hearing it on the 6 o'clock news in the UK. I mean, I'm sure it was an international story because he was a celebrity. So, and they could feel the pain. So, memories buried alive never die, and they're going to come out at some point.
Well, one of the things you talk about is that, judgments that we make on ourselves are really more enduring than the actual event.
Oh, absolutely. So no amount of therapy is ever going to stop terrible things happening to people. But I see the people who really blame themselves, and like I did. So my message to people out in the wider world is, it's not the stuff that happens to us. It really is the enduring judgments we make about those things, those events, and they need to be unpicked, resolved, and released, because they don't serve you and they're not the truth. They are not the truth.
And if we keep self-sabotaging or take a look at our sense of self-worth,
yeah,
and we're always negating it, one of the things that you say is the sense of self-worth is a snapshot of the last 2 weeks.
Yes, the rolling 2 weeks.
Can you expand on that, on what you mean by that?
So in my consulting room, I have a glass fishbowl that is a collection of marbles, blue marbles and gold marbles. So I ask my clients, so when you meet someone on the street and they say, "Oh, hi, how are you?" You don't go back to your childhood, or you don't think about, well, in a month's time I'm going to go on holiday. You kind of take a snapshot of the last 14 days and you do a quick summation in your head, and it's determined by the voice in your head, that gives a running commentary to everything you say and everything you do. So the running commentary is made up of all the gold marbles that might be in the fish tank and all the blue marbles. So I bring the fish tank to my desk and say, look, in this fish tank represents your brain. And you have to now decide how many gold versus blue marbles are in the fish tank. So every time you said something kind to yourself for the last 2 weeks, every time you said something life affirming, something generous of spirit about yourself, you drop in a gold marble. And every time you say something self-deprecating, something judgmental and harsh, you drop in a blue marble. And then you have to pretend that you've been doing this for 2 weeks and you brought it here today. And because I don't do maths, we'll do the thing about there's 100 marbles. So now just give me your percentage, because we're not going to make this into like a physics thing. And really the number of people I see who say, I'm 98% blue marbles and there's 2 gold ones is not unusual. And to the outside world, these would be very successful people, really, really with prestigious jobs, with good incomes, with big families, and their self-talk, which is created in the crucible of our childhood, will be that damning. 98% blue. Yeah.
And as you said, it's the family dynamics. So at what point does somebody start to maybe realize, how does one become self-aware in trying in realizing that we have all these blue marbles, that the last two, how does someone become self-aware?
Right. So where we start with the realization that it's 98% blue, or even 60-40, you know, still probably predominantly blue, is quite a surprise to people, because it happens just below conscious awareness. This voice in our head that gives the running commentary is just below conscious awareness. It's like a toxic drip of a tap. And the first thing to do to change that dynamic is awareness. And then you have to start interrupting. It's interesting if you can work out whose voice it is, because often it's never our voice. You know, does it use slang words? Does it have an accent? Does it use idiom? And then you go, oh my goodness, it's not even me. It's my mother's voice, or my grandfather's voice, or my teacher's voice. And you begin to separate out the voice. And once you have an awareness of it, write down in your phone or on a notebook, because there's recurrent themes. It doesn't go off on very many tangents. It's running a kind of quite succinct monologue. So once you start recognizing, oh my God, I'm going back to that place again where I'm thinking I'm not good enough or I'll never achieve anything, you need to interrupt it. And I teach people how to interrupt it. One of my favorite ways, and I get whole families to do this, is to do the game show noise when you get the answer wrong and it goes, you know, you can't do it when you're in company, but when you're on your own and you find yourself ruminating or catastrophically thinking, listening to this voice, interrupt it. Don't give it free rein of your subconscious mind anymore. It's a BS thought and it needs interrupting.
So that's one way of improving your self-belief.
Yep.
And the unhelpful thinking styles.
Sure.
There we're remembering, and that thought keeps popping in. So how do we resolve our thinking styles that are so really not at all helpful?
Not at all helpful. And no one teaches us how to think, but it dictates so much about how we feel and our place in the world. So, you know, there are lots of different types of thinking, but the main one, things like black and white thinking, where you're either terrible or you're really good, and you don't allow yourself any shades of gray in between. Very, very few things are that polarized. But black and white thinking, where you think in extreme about yourself, is not helpful. Nor is when people ruminate, and they can spend hours ruminating, sitting in an armchair, just going back over the past. What happened? Why did that happen? Trying to look for the why. You know, people become obsessed with the why.
Yes.
Why did this happen to me? Then why did that happen? Sometimes there aren't any easy answers. Sometimes we're never going to find out the why. So these are all identifying one's thinking style or one's mix of thinking styles and starting to unpick that and catching yourself out, like being a detective of your own psychology. There I go again with my catastrophic thinking, or there I go again with my ruminative thinking. The only time when we're really authentic is when we're in the moment. Like, what's happening now? How am I feeling now? Everything else is a fiction.
I totally believe that. And there are so many people who don't understand. And so they start to self-sabotage.
Sure.
Okay. So how do you implement change? You were talking, one of the things you talk about is assessing your intuition. What do you mean by that?
When you're a child growing up in a family dynamic where you're never going to be loved, honored, adored, and heard, you get to know it. You know it on an innate level when you're really very small. But there's no point having insight when you're a child because you have no power. So it's easier for the child to survive, to close down their intuition, to close down their insight. But as we grow into adulthood, that means we've not developed intuition as we grew. And it's a useful tool because our intuition works for our higher good. So it's about, people pleasing is one of the things that also happens with people who grew up in difficult family circumstances. And women are particularly poor at saying no. So getting people to practice saying no. And I say, say no to a second cup of tea, say no to an ice cream, start small, and then really, really build up. Say, oh no, it's okay. I don't want to bring anything to the potlatch. I don't want to bring a dish, or, oh, I can't host Christmas this year or Thanksgiving, all of those things. Go for the big ones, but it's a muscle. And intuition will guide whether we want to say yes to things or no to things, but we have to check in with ourselves first. And that takes the length of a breath in and an exhalation out, just enough time for you to think to yourself, do I really want to do this, or I'm just doing a knee-jerk act by saying yes. So what's my intuition telling me? So it's about that.
But you just talked about breathing, and that's very important, especially when you start thinking negative thoughts or some trauma, something comes up in your head all of a sudden. How should people even think of it? Because, usually it's like, count to 10 or something. How
Sure.
do we work that into an everyday fact of life?
Absolutely. So I teach my clients EFT, emotional freedom technique, which has been around in America for about 35 years now. And one of the things I get them to do is to lean into a stressful state, connect, see it as you saw it then, feel it as you felt it then. What was it like when this happened? And so I say to them, now take 3 easy in and out breaths. And I said, 0 is there's no breath in your body at all. And 10 is you're breathing deeply, freely, and fully. Where's your breathing? What's your depth of breathing when you think about that situation, that scenario? And they'll often say it's a 2 or a 3. And when we're only breathing at a 2 or a 3, we don't have access to any of our grown-up strategies or skills or coping abilities. We're just overwhelmed. So at that point, checking in with your breathing is a really good idea before an interview. How are you going to perform really well at an interview when you're barely breathing? So just go out onto a back step or outside for a moment and just breathe. 3 easy in and out breaths and raise that depth of breathing.
So that's EFT, emotional freedom technique.
Yes,
I've heard of that.
Tapping.
Really? Can you tell a little bit more about that?
So Gary Craig, EFT, he's been around a long time. So I'm an advanced practitioner of EFT. I learned it about 25 years ago. Still teach it to all my clients, still really, really rate it. It's a great way of switching from your daytime brain to your more intuitive, empathetic brain. And it's tapping. So a lot of people use tapping and it's pretty namby-pamby, pretty kind of. But I get my clients to say really kind of show-stopping things, and they're saying them out loud, and the world still turns, and they breathe a sigh of relief. So, I hate my mother-in-law. It's okay, but I hate my mother-in-law. I just get it out there, because we carry these things energetically in our bodies if we don't say them, if we don't get them out. They're things that block our energy.
For sure. And the other thing, one of the last things is power of forgiving.
Yes. So again, I think the whole thing around about forgiving isn't for everyone. And clients can often feel quite panicked at the prospect of having the concept of forgiving introduced to them. They don't want to. I work a lot with survivors, so they don't want to forgive people who cause them such huge, tremendous pain. But being able to just stop carrying that anger, allow themselves to have the freedom, the liberation of letting go of that anger. Even if we never really moved through to full forgiveness, just being able to let go. Because that anger, again, it raises blood pressure, it creates cortisol and adrenaline in our bodies. It's not great for us. So being able to be calm and relaxed when we think about things that have happened to us in the past, because we're no longer carrying that fury. It forgives us, it lets us off the hook, those really painful hooks.
So we're talking about resilience.
Yeah.
from the inside out, and everything you've been talking about is our innermost, not just feelings, but thoughts, and how we talk to ourselves, what we say about ourselves, what we remember. So, resilience. Walk me through how resilience is the key to all of this.
If you think of an arch, and in London, we have really ancient arches, but there's a keystone, the stone that holds the whole arch up. And when we don't have resilience, we can feel as though the world buffets us, knocks us about, that we don't have any traction in any of our decisions. But when we learn to recognize resilience and to create resilience, we understand that we are powerful in our own right, and that we can make a difference for ourselves. We can stop intergenerational pain. It can end with us. That stuff doesn't need to be carried forward. And it means that we can build healthier relationships with others, not based on past pain. So it's the keystone of who we are and how we are in the wider world.
Definitely sounds like it. We use a lot of people, I use it a lot, the word resilient. And what you say, that it's from the inside out, and it's something that can be learned. It's not something that we have to say we're not resilient because we weren't so-called born with it.
Sure.
That's I mean, that is just key to being able to move forward, especially when people have gone through traumatic events that they don't even realize, and they've buried them down.
Yeah.
You blamed yourself for 30 years.
Absolutely.
And can you just briefly tell us, what was the moment and you realized you no longer needed to blame yourself, that you weren't the cause of what happened?
Well, for me, I needed that conversation with my mother to find out her side of the story, because when I told her what had happened to me, she immediately said, don't tell anyone, it's a secret, that's it, don't. And she was really angry. So I just immediately internalized that I'd done something really bad, and how the day had played out for me was completely my fault. So and so having I was leaving my first husband. I had a 5-year-old son, and I was the first person in my family, extended family, to get divorced. So they kind of had a war cabinet where they all got together, and my elder brother said, "Oh well, this is terrible, but honestly, it's the first bad thing that's ever happened in our family." Naively, and my mother and I just locked eyes, and my mother started crying and I started crying, and we knew all of those years in between just completely, like in the movies, slipped away, and we had our first honest conversation about what had happened. So, having made all of those mistakes for all of those years, I've married the wrong person. I married my first husband in 6 weeks. We met and married in 6 weeks. That's deranged behavior. I left home when I was 16. I didn't go to university till I was 48. It's been a picturesque route, but I think if I'd have had that issue resolved when I was 7 and 8 and just a little kid, I'd have had a more clear trajectory. But maybe the scenic route has its appeal too.
Well, what we do need to say from that scenic route came the getting of resilience from the inside out. And you're helping so many people, because resilience is key. Things that have happened to us at a very young age that we have suppressed, and we have all these bad thoughts about ourselves. And when I say bad, it's not, oh, we're a terrible person, yada, yada, yada. It's not lifting us up. It's not giving us self-worth.
Punching us down. It's punching us down.
And we do that on a regular basis.
Yeah.
And so many do not know the power of resilience. So, Sally, if you had one piece of advice that you wanted to give our listeners, what would it be?
That's a big ask. One piece of advice. I think that you can be resolved and you can be released from your past. It's not enough just to be a therapist with skin in the game because bad things happen to me. I want to show that you can resolve and release and be happy, be whole, and fulfill your potential.
Sally, the book is The Getting of Resilience from the Inside Out, and it's also a handbook. There's things that are that people can do. So it's not just a story about therapy and resilience. It's a practical guide that it's a handbook. Sally, thank you so much for being with me here today, and a very important topic, something that helps so many.
Thank you very much, Sylvia. Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
You can find us on all of your popular podcast platforms. And of course, our website, sylviaandme.com. Stay safe, stay healthy, and as always, stay tuned.